Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Aquarian Light. Today's episode is called The Galaxy Within. We're going to be looking at the full Star Wars series and how, captured in this story, there is essentially esoteric wisdom all throughout esoteric symbology of the path that we walk through on a spiritual journey. And the reason we call this episode The Galaxy Within is because this path is something internal. The ascension path is the path walked by the being. And there's a whole world within us that people don't even know about because they never stopped to be aware because they're unconscious, and they are missing out on this massive galaxy that has so much to explore. So we're going to go through this part by part, but let's start at the beginning. So if we approach the Star Wars story chronologically, what happens in the beginning? What's the first beat that starts this whole thing?
Yeah, just real quick, I just want to say, we're not going through all of Star Wars. We're definitely going to ignore anything that was created by Disney that has pretty much no esoteric wisdom, and if anything, possibly references to the left-handed path way of thinking, coming from that big corporate conglomeration, and pretty much, undermined and mined the entire point of the story when they came around to it. So we're just looking at the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. You said you wanted to start chronologically, so I guess I started with episode one. Um, I think with Star Wars, there's three main arcs that are really important beats, as opposed to looking at esoteric wisdom and this idea of a galaxy far, far away. We actually spoke on the Orion Wars in a prior episode, and it's said that George Lucas, part of his inspiration actually came from knowledge of that event. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not, but there's definitely a lot of esoteric wisdom within the the arcs that come through this, and these are more general, like overarching tropes. I think that's what's cool about this. We spoke about the Matrix in the past, for example, and the Matrix is like just a dead ringer overt for Gnosticism, and that's great. But I feel like with Star Wars, it's more of a it's these universal truths, and the representations of some of these characters are more of an overarching, maybe even not even for something like a journey a soul goes through over the course of an entire existence rather than in a lifetime, but it's into a lifetime of a character, right? So starting at episode one, like I said, there's three major arcs that I think to really play through. Two of them are well, they're all entwined with each other, but two of them are part of the Skywalker family arc, and which means that one is Luke, being that comes later in the original trilogy, but the two that start at the very beginning, right from the starting narrative, would be that of Anakin Skywalker, right, and the Emperor Palpatine, or I guess he starts out as a chancellor from Naboo in the first movie or whatever. But yeah, so um let's talk about Anakin Skywalker first. So Anakin Skywalker's arc is pretty interesting in the sense of, symbolically, if we pull out from it, right? Uh it's kind of the like a symbol for the journey that a soul goes through on the path, right? In total, let's say that we have a certain amount of lifetimes, right? And then we're gonna go through different ebbs and flows in these lifetimes, have these experiences, and eventually we have to find balance and then awaken from the construct. And there's that aspect, and there's also the aspect of okay, he's the what we would call maybe the fallen bodhisattva, or like the master that's come down is sent down, like clearly, right? There's the messianic things, but the master that falls and then has to find his way, right? So in the first episode, he's really only introduced as a child. Right off the bat, there's the idea of the Immaculate Conception, which we could tie into many of the religions around the world, and many stories of these divine prophetic figures, right? All born of these immaculate conceptions. We could look at, obviously there's Jesus Christ and there's Krishna and uh, Osiris. Sorry, Horus.
So
The
someone might say, where's the Immaculate Conception in Star Wars? Like how is Luke born from an Immaculate Conception?
In episode one, Anakin is directly born out of immaculate conception. There's a scene where they say that he's born from the Force, and Qui-Gon Jinn takes a blood test of him, and he says metachlorians are the highest or whatever, like it's the highest level they've ever seen, even higher than Master Yoda. And then when he asks the mother about who the father was, she was like, "Oh, there was no father. That she just carried him, and that he carried him to term and had him, and that's it, right?" And later on, when he goes in front of the council, he tells him that he was born from the Force, like born of consciousness. So it's a pretty overt reference to Immaculate Conception. Um, so that right up off the riff is like letting us know that this character is important, like prophetic character that's coming down to some the high level being that's special and has a special connection to the Force, which the Force in general, right, is consciousness. Um, there's a Yoda quote in Empire Strikes Back, but where he says, "The Force is his ally, and that it flows through everything. It binds everything together, and it means consciousness, right? From our understanding of what the universe is, and the Force is just another word for that. It's mystical energy that everything that's created and non-created, everything that's manifested is that. So
I like how they play with that, where they show that it's essentially neutral. It has these two poles, and you have these two different groups that are working with the poles. And when there's too much force on either side, then it comes out of balance. And then, even though each side is representing its pole, if they're not in balance, no matter how much they are aligned with their side of the pole, they know that that force that they all use needs to find balance somehow. It needs to be in the middle, even if they want to work with the aspect of light, or the darkness wants to work with its aspect. But without balance, there's something wrong cosmically that will need to be corrected, and they're all seeking that correction, that balance. So that's also very interesting.
yeah, and there's not too much going on with Anakin in the first movie outside of him just being like discovered, and then eventually by the end of the movie, he gets taken on finally as a Padawan. They find him right while they're on the run from I believe the Trade Federation, right? And they find him on Tatooine. He's a slave of the Hutts. They free him, and then by the end of the movie, they get the Jedi Council agrees to let him get trained. So like that's like what's accomplished in his arc is that he's like discovered and then taken in. There is one good line though that Qui-Gon says to him when they finally bring him to um, Coruscant, and um, at that point, I think they don't agree to let him train him yet. But eventually, they let Obi-Wan train him, but they didn't let Qui-Gon. But Qui-Gon tells him to remember that your focus determines your reality, and I think that's a really cool quote because it's like it harkens to what we talked about with conscious willpower and how everything is really just your intention, so that your reality is your conscious willpower. That's like a great line.
Yeah,
Um,
it's so direct and clear and succinct, that message that shows that the movie is not just a movie. It's a teaching delivered in symbol and in great iconic lore, really. And we've been talking about this so much in every episode, the power of conscious willpower, because for those that are working with spiritual tools, they can get very attached to those tools, and then it can turn into a kind of dogma that can even remove the power of the tool itself, and then they get stuck because they don't make that jump to finding out that everything is conscious willpower, and that the tool is to help you get there, like a little boat to cross a river. And then they get in the boat and they just go around in circles on the river and they never cross over. So that's a very important line. I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm. And the other main thing going on in the first episode, right, is the establishment of Chancellor Palpatine and his first foray into becoming the chancellor, the supreme chancellor of the Senate, right? And I mean, Palpatine's character is great, right? I mean, it's not just a villain, right? I mean, it's the embodiment of the ego, and we really see that in the prequel trilogy. It's one of the best parts of the prequel trilogy, which leaves a lot. I mean, to be desired sometimes, especially the first two movies are pretty not great, but the arc around the emperor really delivers, and just the whole look at like how he just is the ego and the manipulations and the machinations of how he plays both sides against each other. I mean, this is very clear early on from in the first movie, right, where he's both the Dark Lord Darth Sidious, who is basically telling the Trade Federation to put this blockade on the planet Naboo, and then he's a chancellor from the planet Naboo, and he's creating this conflict, and at this point it's still a small level conflict. We'll get to how he creates bigger conflicts as we go along, but he's a small level conflict like on his planet, right? All to manipulate, right, the queen to then go in the Senate and to demand that he replaces the other Supreme Chancellor who's too weak and is wrapped up in the bureaucracy that's going on in Coruscant, the bureaucracy who's also underneath his fingers, right? So the bureaucracy that he's having that is manipulating the current chancellor to look weak. And then he has that bureaucracy, which includes the Trade Federation and the banking clans, to attack the planet that he's from. So the whole thing is set up to then have him pushed to be given this role of now he's the head of the Senate by the end of the movie. And that's like the first step in that whole thing, because he starts playing everyone against each other, even from early on. And it starts with this small, the first movie is very small scale. It's like this one little conflict on this one planet, right? And they just find Anakin on another planet. It's all starting off really slow and small scale, but like the seeds that are planting in this, and just the Emperor's character. We look at his. I mean, he
So
like.
wait, if we come back to Palpatine, he's
Mhm.
playing both sides. How does that demonstrate the ego?
Well, it's just so like in a sense, like he's the ego itself is the whispering in everybody's ear and like playing to their desires or their wants or playing to their fears, right? It's not even like I said, it's not even like he's like this like villain figure. It's like this guy behind the scenes that just like in everybody's ear and just orchestrating everything. It's like if we were to look at the world today, right? And think of what the ego does collectively to the collective consciousness, right? And it's like, how everything looks at everything in this day and age, and everything gets like played against each other and like the media and everything, but it's all a reflection of what's internally inside of the collective itself. And I feel like that's who Palpatine is. It's not like, yes, he's a man in the movie and the big bad, right? But in a sense, he's everyone's ego because he knows the right thing to say to every single person. I mean, as we go on, we'll even see even the Jedi, right, who are the ones that are walking the path of the light and stuff. They still are in the sense of how we always talk about how like a master is only a certain degree of mastery, and even masters have egos. He even plays to their egos, right, and where they're blinded, and he plays everybody. And he always knows the right thing to say to the right
Yes,
person.
the Jedi, right?
Yeah, but he's ahead of every. It's like he plays everyone against each other, and he knows beforehand exactly what's in everyone's head to get them to, he's a step ahead of them because he's inside. Like I said, it's like he is the ego. Like his sense is like he knows that everyone's ego is, so he knows exactly what buttons to push on all the different players all over the galaxy to get the result that he wants. Because if you really think about it, the result that he ends up getting is pretty ridiculous, right? I mean, like,
Oh, it's out of control. So the galaxy within, if this whole Star Wars story were inside someone, if you imagine that you are a universe and this is happening inside of you, that demonstrates the not just the multiplicity that is our psychology when we're caught in ego and having all these different conflicting desires, but it also shows how the desires come in to the front seat and they say their piece, they push you to take an action, and then they go away, and then something else comes in, and none of them have any rhyme or reason. So in the same way that he's playing all these different parties and telling them just the perfect weakness that is going to hook them, that is how our egos work. And so you'll see, if you're observing yourself and you're watching them play out inside of you, what does that look like? They don't make any sense. They will always say exactly what they need to say in the moment to push you to do a certain action. So as a kind of a silly, shallow example, let's take someone that is trying to get into shape. And so they say, the ego of vanity says, yes, I'm so determined, I'm going to go running. And then the ego of laziness will say, but Monday is not a good day because on Monday I have this long meeting at work, and that means that it doesn't go with running. So I shouldn't do it on Monday, but I'm going to have a really good diet so that I can be healthy. And then the ego of gluttony comes in on Tuesday and says, but the diet doesn't apply today because today I need to, on Tuesday, I need to meet with my colleagues. And this is very important because I need to socialize. And that means the socializing means I need to eat extra food because that's how you make good friends. And none of that makes any sense. But then the third day, then guilt and shame and all these other things come in succession. It's like all these different people that are not talking to each other in the same way that Palpatine is playing all those different characters at once. And that whole Star Wars story is inside of you.
hmm No, it's so true, and even in the sense where we harken back to where we talked about how it could be based off the Orion Wars, and we talked about what the Orion Wars were symbolically in a sense of that duality in the universe itself. Well, Star Wars is kind of that duality of the universe that's within you right now, right? So it's like the same thing, right? Um, so it makes sense if it was based off of that. But yeah, and I think that's I think that's pretty good of like the gist of the importance that comes out of episode one. Like I said, the prequel trilogy had a pacing problem in the sense that I think they didn't get a lot done in the first two movies and then jammed a lot into the third one. I mean, at the end of the day, it resolved in an amazing way that like really got to where it needed to get to because they already knew where they were going, but it could have been paced better. So I don't know. There's not too much to say on the first movie, and probably not even too much on the second, but a little bit more on the second. So we'll move on to Attack of the Clones. And now Attack of the Clones has the time jump. I believe it's 10 years, right? 10 years, that still doesn't make it any less creepy that Anakin and Padme start dating, but
That's just trivia, not relevant to the actual spiritual meaning in the movie, but it is funny.
that was just a joke. Yeah. Um, but yeah, it jumps 10 years. And now Anakin is kind of in that spot of well, actually, what somebody who is recapitulating might struggle with, someone who's like has a spontaneous awakening and has all this power, but hasn't really done any work, right? He's full of pride, full of ego, like extremely talented. Already he has a Padawan, one of the more powerful Jedi in the galaxy, as they make it out to be one of the better sword fighters, full of pride, full of anger, you know, he's full of lust, as it was found out during this movie as well. So he's has all these abilities, and this is where we talk about how we've talked about how one can develop abilities and not work on the ego, and that could be very dangerous, even if they're doing things for righteous reasons. And and they're doing good, and they're out to do good, but they don't get rid of their ego, and they build up all these powers. Now the ego can take advantage of these powers, and I think that's really the cautionary tale of that is seen with Anakin through this two movie arc, because I would say it starts really in this movie. He's just a kid in the first one, but we start to see that, like the beginnings of that, the arrogance, overconfidence in oneself and his abilities, you know, certainly. Yes, he wants to be a Jedi, but that's the thing. He wants to be a good Jedi. He wants to be the best Jedi. He's full of desire. He's full of all of that, which is the opposite of what we need to be when we're walking this path. It's one thing to you know be a hero in a sense, but like to want to be the hero is also ego, right? We talked about that with Neo as well, right? As long as Neo was like trying to be good and trying to fight Smith, he actually strengthened Smith. Now, granted, that was the parallel, but in this sense, right? Anakin is already at this point strengthening the Darth Vader that's within him, right? He just doesn't know it yet, but that's what he's feeding that. He's feeding his ego. Um,
I just want to backtrack a little bit because you said the word recapitulation. So, for those who are maybe doing very deep spiritual studies, they might know what we mean. But for those that don't know, just really briefly, we're referring to someone who maybe has done some spiritual work in a past life and they've awakened their consciousness to a certain level, and then they come back in this life. And so they
yeah, basically somebody that's born with a high level of consciousness. So like we established he was born from immaculate conception. So someone that's like maybe already was a master and they were sent down to do a mission, which is what he's the symbol for, right? Like the prophets are always born already like kind of out of place, out of place. And we use the word recapitulation for that. I'm sorry if I didn't explain that better. Um, but yeah, in that sense, one of the traps for someone who's in that position being that, they're born into a vessel that still has ego like everyone else is, but they have this rapid expansion because they have a higher level of consciousness naturally, is that they fall into these traps of like this mythical pride and just pride in general, just right. Like they have all these abilities and their ego is able to use the abilities and they haven't actually done the work, which could take a long time to do psychological work, especially if one is young. I mean, Anakin at this way, he's basically a teenager, right? So, you have all that going on as well. But it's a common thing, right? For a lot of like the prophets and things like that to have a part of their life where that's going on, because that's like one of the bigger struggles, right? You maybe don't struggle with the things a regular person struggles with, in the sense that you're, I guess, born at a level of sense higher than that, but you struggle with these things of this separateness and feeling superior to others, things of that nature.
And
So
that's a huge trap, right? For
mhm.
someone who is at a certain level of consciousness, that doesn't mean that they're an awakened master yet, and they can still uh, regress, they can still fall at that level. And the trap for them is that once they have some abilities, then they think they've made it. Like the young Padawan who doesn't have the skill set yet to be a Jedi, but he believes that he should already be promoted now. And that, look at me, I'm so good. And he doesn't see his own flaws, his own lack of experience, but believes that he has more experience and more capability than he really does. And then it's that ego that comes in and brings in negative energies and hinders his progress. And for someone in a spiritual path, that is the thing that can stop them from making any progress for a long time.
Yeah, and this is also where he starts to struggle with heavy attachment. um this is in this movie, I think it's the movie that his mother gets kidnapped by the sand people, and like tortured, and then he goes to rescue her, but she like dies in his arms, and then he uh retorts by slaughtering the whole village indiscriminately, I think as he says to Padme, is that he killed even the women and the children just out of anger, which already is a no sign. um Even if he wasn't a Jedi, I think morally he knows it's wrong too, right? But you know he tries to rationalize it or whatever. And yeah, these attachments start to become an issue because even when he goes to Master Yoda and he talks about the visions, like about, like, he sees like people being harmed and stuff, and Yoda tells him to be careful about, looking into the future, things of that nature, that's always in motion. um or actually, that actually might be the next movie. That might be when he sees Padme, but still same type of advice, right? It would be, the advice works for both things, but to be careful,
That's
look.
really important advice, right?
Yeah.
Because people that are doing spiritual practices, they may start to have internal experiences. And when you go into the astral, it's all emotion. You can easily be fooled by your own delusions and think that this is divinity talking to me. And this is, I'm sure this is going to happen. So it's part of that whole path of being led astray by the ego, by the darkness.
Yeah, actually, I'll come back to that though. I do believe it's from the next movie, actually, when it's relation to Padme, and I'll get back to that. But yeah, he has these visions, and he sees the future, but you know, and instead of just accepting things for what they are and leaving it how it is, he lets his attachment, his emotion, and his anger, and all that, feels all this pain and suffering that comes along with it, right? I think after he kills all the sand people and stuff, Yoda says, I sense great pain, young Skywalkers, and so much pain. He's suffering. Yoda feels it from Coruscant. He's like going on his like kill spree. Like, he doesn't know he's killing sand people, but he just knows that he just feels his pain and suffering. It's like how much it is. So he's clearly just fully identified and in like rage mode at that point. And then of course there's also the love story that he has with Padme, and he's starting to fall in, and very much of like a teenage lust, like he's this infatuation. You know, it's this is actually, I think it's actually an important theme because it eventually is this like lustful relationship that causes him to fall. And in a whole come roundabout way, right? When he eventually, you know, comes back around to complete the prophecy all the way at the end of the arc, it's actually him finding actual love that that does that as well. So like it's important to note that like early on, since he's still with an ego, he doesn't really know what love is. His idea of love is this possessive, lustful, um, sort of attachment to this woman that he met when he was a kid, had a crush on, probably like from when he was a kid, and like that's all he's ever thought about. And now he's getting what he wants, and to him that it's an attachment like that, um over true love, because he's not capable of feeling unconditional love because he hasn't awakened that faculty, and he's still trapped in the duality of the universe. So that's an important point there too.
And that just shows it's a very good example of how much pain comes from attachment and how destructive attachment is. What you said was very important, that he had a crush as a kid, and then this grew into infatuation, because this shows how the ego is created. That when the consciousness is asleep, then we take in impressions and we mistransform them, and we don't even know where the desires that arise within us come from. We were asleep, so we didn't see when we created them, but now they're there and they start bubbling up from the subconscious, and we identify with it. We think, oh, that's me. I want this now. And then, like a child putting their hand in the fireplace or on a stove, we go and reach for the thing that we think we desire, and we find that it causes us pain. So he didn't know where that infatuation came from. He didn't realize that it was something that was imprinted on him in his youth, and then he pursues it to its end, and all it leads to is destruction, pain, and heartbreak, and even destruction for the other person as well.
Yeah. And then one other thing with Anakin and Attack of the Clones is just a little small quick symbolism, but it's when he lets his pride get the best of him and he rushes in against Count Dooku, and foolishly he gets himself clipped pretty much, and loses his arm. And outside of the obvious, well, he lost his arm because he was being prideful and foolish, and that's ego. It's the first like mechanical implant that he gets, which is kind of symbolic for his descent into ego. So the mechanicity. So now he's a little bit more machine, right? As we know that eventually he becomes a lot more machine. So, but that's the first step in that is at the end of this movie, right? So this is showing that this is his beginning descent into darkness. And then with the rest of the movie, that we get back into the arc of Palpatine, and this is where Palpatine gets pretty busy, right, in this movie. So the Supreme Chancellor, right, is now he's the Supreme Chancellor of the Senate, and he's been doing that work. He's still in that position 10 years later that he somehow never lost. He got given that, and he's stayed there since the first movie. And now all of a sudden there becomes this plot, and it's that kind of like World War II vibes, like how Hitler had the Reich bombed, right, and blamed the Jews, but he did it himself. And now we're really starting to see that where you're starting this galactic war, and it's like all over it. It starts with you know, um, when like investigating a bounty hunter, Obi-Wan goes back to this planet where there's cloners, actually a hidden planet. There's actually a good line for that, not really related to the arc, but another good quote when he goes to this like I guess like space diner, and he's asking about like trying to find this planet based on the dart of the bounty hunter, and he asks the guy at the counter um about like how could he find this, how could the planet be missing or something, how it's not in the archives. And the guy laughs at him. He's like, for a Jedi, you think you would know the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? So and basically knocking the fact that like a computer can have whatever knowledge or not, it can be deleted, but it's not true wisdom. Wisdom is in true knowing, and not something mechanical. It's not the intellect. So I thought that's a pretty good line as well. But
That's such an important point.
mhm.
I love that they hide so much wisdom in the movies. I mean, the good movies anyway, not the
Yep.
Disney ones, but how there are so many people out there parroting spiritual teachings from all sources, and all they're doing is repeating what they've read, but they're not speaking from the heart. They're not speaking from experience. So they're behaving like a computer, like a robot, just regurgitating, just saying what they've read, but they kind of like it. They think it could be true. They don't have any proof. They just want to sound smart, or they want to feel safe. And when you subscribe blindly to something and just demand it to be true and say, as long as I hold this for my reality, then I'm safe, you can feel comforted in it. But that's not true knowing. So no, it's a very good line.
Yeah. And then so the Obi-Wan goes to this cloning planet, and he finds that they've been actually using this bounty hunter to create a clone army. And the clone army is apparently, was ordered by the prior head of the Jedi Council who had been murdered. But when he actually investigates a little bit more on the bounty hunter said he was actually hired by Darth Tyrannus, which is Count Dooku, we later find out in the movie. And then right away from there, we can really see the machinations. And as I was saying, with Emperor is always head. So he sent his new apprentice, because Tyrannus is his new apprentice in this movie, to order this thing under the guise of the Jedi Council, like they lied to the Kaminoans. And they order this army for the Republic, but it's ordered by the Sith, right? And then meanwhile, that same guy, Darth Tyrannus, who is Count Dooku, is the leader of the separatist movement that is creating this conflict and these people that want to separate from the Republic. So clearly they're also under the control of Darth Sidious and the Sith, right? And all of this is being played against each other, right? And then and what's even more fun about it is when we look at the fact that so like these separatists, the trade federation, the bureaucrats, whatever that are trying to separate because whatever for financial reasons, that all their armies are made up of droids, right? They're battle droids, they're like robots, right? And then in a sense, the Republic army that ends up getting conscripted, and when by the end of the movie, when we finally the Clone Wars begin and stuff, and this conflict hits a mass, you know, it's clones versus droids, and what is that? It's just like the unconscious versus the other conscious. It's just like a alternative, like we talk about duality, how both sides of duality are both just unconsciousness. Well, what's the difference between clones and droids? It's a doesn't really matter, right? It's the good, evil, whatever. It's all unconsciousness. And I
It's
think
so good though that
Mhm.
that battle uh is this huge amplification of the mechanicity. It's going like, yes, we started with the symbol with Anakin's hand or whatever, but the there's just machines galore everywhere, endlessly, all shapes, sizes. They're all fighting, they're all in a battle. They're two poles of the same coin, and they're all programs en masse, countless, countless, countless programs. And all of that is part of the galaxy within when you are unconscious and when you are trapped in ego. when
Mm,
you when you really fathom that symbol in the movie, if you can see that as your ego, it's shocking. There's just so many programs. That doesn't mean the ego can't be worked on and dissolved, but it just shows you a very strong, vivid picture of how dire of a situation you're in.
absolutely. And then also just one other note to this as far as the growing of the emperor's powers, right, at this point. But he, when the war starts, he's granted emergency powers to basically be like have more control and be able to move on the military without having to consult with the Senate. These are things that we've seen even in real life politics. It's like, oh, there's an emergency, so now I need more power. And this is just slowly, again, the ego, he literally creates the war like we just talked about. The war is all created. He's controlling all sides of the coin, playing everybody against each other, the Jedi against the bureaucrats, and then this and then that, and he's playing all of this creating this threat that is literally not real. It's a threat that he created himself, and using it to seize more control of the galaxy within, of the vessel, right? So that the ego is taking more control, making if the universe is a person, right, and this is happening internally, it's falling more asleep, right? And then we move on to Revenge of the Sith, and at that movie, there's so much packed into that movie, right? But like right from rip, right, it's just like this all out, just a battle, and there's a battle in space, and they're fighting, and again, right away with the Chancellor is kidnapped by Count Dooku, who works for him, right? And now they have to go rescue him. So they're fighting this battlefield, and they're going to rescue him. And right at the beginning, they confront Dooku again. This time, Anakin, who's a little bit more patient, but still obviously fighting the darkness, gets the upper hand through his skills on Dooku. And I think Obi-Wan is injured, so he's unconscious, and he has the Count Dooku in like captured basically. So like it's over. The battle should be over, and he knows he shouldn't kill him, and the ego is in his ear. Oh, you should kill him. He's too dangerous. And he's like, I shouldn't. I'm a Jedi. I shouldn't do this. And he's like, no, just do it, do it, do it. And he kills him. And he's like, I shouldn't have done that, which is really kind of silly because like, yeah, no, you shouldn't have. But it's like again, just a little bit more darkness, and that's the ego in his ear, literally just sitting. He's sitting there while he has this prisoner, this defenseless prisoner, and just chirping at him like he's not gonna kill him. And he gets to kill him, and just chirping at him and chirping at him, right? So,
That's how the ego works.
mhm.
We feel the light of the essence guiding us to make the right choice. And people can say it almost feels like it hurts. Like that's your what in Pinocchio they call the conscience, right? The little voice, that little feeling that's telling you what is the right thing to do. And you feel it in your heart. That's, your higher aspect guiding you. And then in comes the ego, and the ego is trying desperately to override that. And it's just saying whatever it can say to try and get you at your weakness, like, oh, you deserve this. That's unfair. And then they did this. They don't understand you. Just all of this nonsense that's not true. Anything to bait you to go in and make the wrong choice. And in this movie, he's going to become dark so fast. He just, it's like the slope is so slippery. You keep choosing darkness, watch it consume you really fast. He makes some wrong choices and then they just get worse and worse. And by the end, he's done for, right?
Yeah, and then they get back to the planet, and he runs over to his secret hidden wife in the corner and finds out that she's pregnant. That leads to the whole arc with um that he sees her dying in childbirth in the future, right? And that's where it actually comes out. He goes to Yoda, and Yoda's like, "Be careful looking to the future, because it's always emotion." And he's like, "Better to train to detach from everything that which you're attached to." Which of course Anakin doesn't listen to that. No, I'm going to figure out how to save her from death. Which the ego, the Emperor, somehow he knows everything, right? Uh, he he somehow knows that Anakin's worried about her dying in death, even without being told. I think later in the movie when it's revealed, like right before his turn, and he's like, "Oh, you should stay with me, and I'll save your wife from certain death." And he's like, "How?" He's like, "What did you say? Like, how did you know that?" But he just does because he's the ego, right? Like he knows. But he starts laying these breadcrumbs about it. He starts telling him Sith stories, which realistically at this point you would think that Anakin should realize that he's the Dark Lord of the Sith, because how does he know these Sith legends and things of Dark Plagueis the Wise who can bring people back from the dead and all of this nonsense, and who lost his power by his only apprentice killing him. That's the only way that he lost. You would think that like anybody with some sense would be able to see that this is shady, but he's already caught up in his ego and he's so concerned about saving his wife. It just sounds good to him. And oh, that's said at that point, Palpatine's a good man. He's just trying to end the war and help me out. But he
And
gives a
that
line.
justification is important, right? Because
Mm,
then even after he finds out, it's the same justification that keeps him
mhm.
on his side.
Yeah. But he gives a line, the dark side of the force leads to many powers that some would deem to be unnatural, which is a great line. That Palpatine pulls out when they're like at that, like, I guess whatever, some sort of cosmic opera or something, and they're sitting in the box. And so it starts to go on like that, and then and the playing of the egos of everyone starts to really ramp up in this. He the the Chancellor, right, like imposes that Anakin gets put on the Jedi Council without being made a master and earning it. So and then the Jedi, because he already knows that they're suspicious of him, actually allow this to happen, but they don't give him the grant. They won't grant him the rank of master, but they allow him to be on the council under the premise of, now you need to spy on the chancellor for us. So like we're gonna let you have this appointment, even though we don't want to give it to you, so that you spy on us for him, because we think he's shady, because he is shady. But the way they go about it, they don't see that it's like he's playing their egos, and he knows that that's going to make Anakin then doubt them. Like, why are they doing that? Because it's Anakin has getting suspicious of them because they're acting strange in his mind, because his pride is like, how can they not make me a master? And he just knows that they're not going to do these things. And it's like funny. So these things start to, bubble up slowly. And it's like he's always like one step ahead of everyone. Uh, I think Yoda in the movie says the dark side of the force is clouding everything, and nobody can see anything that's going on because everybody's in their ego. Even the Jedi, who are all these pure beings, right? They're all in their ego. Um, even
Because if they're
even
masters, it doesn't mean that they're 100%
mhm,
pure yet.
mhm. Even
Yoda
once,
would be the highest one.
yeah, he gives Anakin the location of the separatists, the droid, sorry, the General Grievous, that they're looking for to end the war. He said, "Oh well, once we finally catch Grievous, it's going to end. Finally, when we catch Dooku, they killed Dooku. Oh, but now we have to catch Grievous. That's how the ego keeps it going, right? Till he gets his way. And but he intentionally tells Anakin about Grievous, knowing that the Jedi Council will not send Anakin, and then he gets mad about that too. So they send Obi-Wan to take care of Grievous, and then eventually Anakin figures out that the Chancellor is the Dark Lord of the Sith, And even then, he goes back. He actually does the right thing at first. He goes back to Mace Windu and says, "You know what? He's not going to give up the powers once Obi-Wan kills Grievous because he's the Dark Lord of the Sith." And even then, right? Mace Windu plays his ego. He's like, "Oh, you can't come with us." I sense a conflict in you, like basically saying, "I don't trust you, Anakin." When Anakin doesn't trust him, and he's not wrong, but the thing is that egoicness is pushes Anakin even more away, right? Make him come anyway, right? It's
So
like
on every turn, the
it's
ego
the
always has
ego.
its
Yeah, yeah,
it has its desires, and it always achieves the opposite of what it's trying to do. It's so funny.
yeah. He's like, just stay here and be patient, which obviously is it's not gonna be, when there's conflict there, he thinks the Jedi are shady and try to take over because the Emperor is feeling that they're gonna really try to take over and that they're really the evil ones, even though obviously they're not the evil ones. But like he's like in Anakin's head. So like all of the things that the Jedi do to just take precautions because they can see that Anakin's conflicted actually makes it look like that they're shady to him through his twisted lens, that the ego has twisted his lens. So it's like really interesting. But
That's
uh,
so fascinating. I
mhm.
just the way that he's so misled about the whole thing demonstrates how the ego creates illusion. If we take the example, bringing it to 2025 planet Earth, modern society, when, say, someone has a sense of injustice towards someone they know, let's say a colleague, and this whole universe, this whole narrative can be built up by the egos of self-love, self-compassion, and pride, about how this other person is out to get them, and then they did this and they did that, and the story can go on, and this person can feel very justified in telling anyone who will listen, their neighbor, their friends, their family, "Oh, can you believe this person at work? And this is what they did, and this is what they did." And of course, all of the people around them, maybe some of them will genuinely believe the story and affirm it, and others will just be those fake friends that just say yes to everything, and so they will be the reaffirming voice that they're also unconscious, and they'll affirm that illusion. So then this person has created this whole fictitious view of the reality where this other person is the bad guy. But actually, in this scenario, they could be the bad guy. They could be super mean and unfair to this other person, all based off of the illusion in their head. And that's how the ego works. When you see through the illusion and you see how ridiculous the whole story was, there's like this sense of remorse that comes, like, how could I have been that way? How could I have misperceived so wrongly about all of this? And that's what is happening in that part of the movie.
No, yeah, absolutely. But it's just so well put together. Um, Obviously the pacing is a little bit off in this movie. It's a little bit rushed. And for anybody who's watched Revenge of the Sith, but it's still like on point. It's a little bit rushed. I think once like the final turn happens. So like, okay, Mace Windu goes and confronts him with a group of other Jedi who are all apparently really terrible at their job because they all get like somehow he shows up with four people, and even though Mace Windu by himself is able to abscond and kind of beat the Emperor, the other three die within like the first 3 seconds. So it's like should have brought Anakin easier, but but anyway, so Mace Windu, he gets the emperor in a, or sorry, well, at this point still the chancellor in a compromising position, and then of course Anakin, who couldn't wait any longer in the council chamber, finally arrives, and he arrives to the scene with Mace Windu having disarmed the chancellor and has him in that position, and even then the best part, like the ego, so defeated, the ego's there beaten, and at first, and Mace Windu says, "Oh, you're under arrest." He's going to arrest him, right? And then what does he do? He starts shooting his own lightning like through off of Mace Windu's lightsaber and injuring himself, right? And first of all, to try to play like make him like a victim, like, oh, he's like attacking me, right? Like I'm weak, I'm helpless, I'm dying, I'm killing myself, but like, oh, see, they're trying to kill me. And then even better than that though, because I guess he won't surrender, then Mace Windu's ego takes over and says, you know what, enough. I just need to kill him. He's too powerful. He's got the cords. He's trying to shoot this lightning at me. You know, at first he literally said, he's like, you're under arrest. They took you in. But like because of this whole show that the Emperor does with the lightning and stuff, even though he's harming himself and trying to get in Anakin's head, then it triggers something in Mace Windu to be like, you know, that no, actually, you know what, you're too dangerous. I'm just going to kill you, which thus reaffirming the concept that the Jedi are trying to come kill him and take over, and that getting into Anakin's head. Although the real thing that gets him, I think, pushes him over the edge over the plot to take over by the Jedi is when he said, hey, "If you help me, or I'll save your wife from certain death." Right? If I die, your wife, I can't help your wife. Then he cuts off Mace Windu's arm, and then whatever turns to the dark side. Um, and then it goes from 0 to 100 real quick. And like 2 minutes later, he agrees to go kill a bunch of children, which, you know, maybe it could have been paced a little bit better. But it's just like, you know, he finally makes that choice. And what hammers it in is, again, he wants to save his wife. But even what's even funny about that is after that happens, right? And right before he gets ordered to kill the younglings, he's like, well, he's like, all right, I picked your side. And like, tell me how to save Padme's life. And then all of a sudden the story changes, right? Then the ego is like, oh, the power to cheat death has only been achieved by one. But if we work together, maybe we can figure it out. So basically, I made that shit up.
Yeah, the ego is very uh clever in that way. Like it's not intelligent, but it
Mhm.
always has its bag of tricks, and the goalpost keeps moving because that's how it hooks you, right? So say someone is dealing with vices, and let's say they're having too much of something, or maybe they're trying to overcome, say, smoking, and they've quit, and then the ego says, well, if you just have one, you know, it doesn't really count because it's just one. And the next minute they're smoking a pack, and it says, yeah, but is a pack really anything? Actually, it doesn't really matter because next week you're going to have none. So then a pack today and none next week will basically just cancel out. And none of that makes any sense. But when the person is caught up in it and they just are full of desire, they'll take any ridiculous notion that it can concoct, and it's not true. So it will keep changing whatever it has to say at that time to try and exploit the weaknesses when we've been in that egoical pattern to continue feeding the same egos.
Yeah, no, definitely for sure. That's true. But yeah, it just is so amusing, right? Like when you see that, you know, it's like, oh man, I just like betrayed everything that I'm all about. I enjoyed exactly what I was sworn to destroy, right? And all to get this information that apparently doesn't exist. And now it's like I'm so far in it that even after I don't get that information and it's made clear that it doesn't exist, now I go to agree to do something savage like murder some children because I went from being a hero to just an extreme villain in like 30 seconds. So, you know, it's it it's that story, that's the fallen master, right? He's fallen, the angel that's fallen to become a demon, right? And that moment, you
And
know.
it's so ironic that he's the one that kills his wife anyway. So if he hadn't have been so attached and emotional and desperately trying from an egoic perspective to try and save her, then she would never have died in the first place. That never would have happened. But it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. His
Hmm.
belief that she was going to die was the reason he became the darkness that
Well, yeah,
kills her.
she literally dies in childbirth, like you saw, but not for any reason. Otherwise, she just like gave up the will to live, which I don't know if that actually could happen, but I mean, for the storyline purposes, it works. It makes sense.
Well, her own husband tried to strangle her to death. So it's understandable that the character now
Yeah.
is tapping out.
Well, that does happen. We didn't actually get to that part, but yeah, when you're talking about the scene in Mustafar, which, by the way, between so first of all, one of the high points in the whole series is the climax of this movie, right? And so when we have Obi-Wan confronts Anakin on Mustafar, which, by the way, a beautiful symbology. But he goes to this volcanic planet he sent there. He kills all the separatists and ends the war because the ego got what it wants, right? It turned Jesus into the Antichrist, right? So immediately the Emperor has him kill some kids and then sends him. He gathered all of the separatists on this planet because he's been controlling both sides the whole time. And then he just sends them to murder them when they're like, hey, all we want is peace. We don't even want to fight anymore. It's like, nah, I'm the ego. I just kill all of you. You should have made a deal with the devil. Um, but just the symbology of like, okay, like here he is on this volcanic planet. It's like the lower astral, right? Because he turned to the dark side and fallen all the way to the pits of hell. And then Obi-Wan goes to confront him. Well, he follows Padme because he uses his intuition because she doesn't actually give up where he is, but he knows she's gonna go to him. And then yeah, initially she's like, oh, just drop all this and leave it behind. And then and instead he's like, oh, you're plotting on me too, and you brought Obi-Wan here to kill me, and he starts choking her and all of this other stuff. So right, he did all this to save her. He's telling her, I did this to save you. And then she's like, I don't like what you did. So that he almost nearly kills her. In that moment itself, right? The logic. Um, but that's probably so far gone. There's the great dialogue exchange right before they actually engage in combat. But when he's like, "You turned her against me," and Obi-Wan's like, "You did that yourself." It's like your lust for power, your greed. That's what turned her against you, not it wasn't anything that I did. There our allegiance is to like democracy and the republic, and Anakin goes, he's like, I've brought safety and security to my new empire. There go the egos in his head. The egos who took over. It's the ego is the emperor, right? But the egos got into his mind. He think he's just the stooge. He's the stooge of the ego. That's how all of us are. We think it's us, the ego. Those entities are controlling the ship. It's just the meat suit that the ego's in control, and you think you think you're something. It's in a sense where we always say, right, like um really this vessel, this person that we are, this personality is nothing, right? Is the being is eternal, the being goes on forever. This body dies, goes to the grave, nobody remembers it. It doesn't really matter what we establish. And in a sense, you only think that you're something in this vessel when you're with the ego inside of you, and that's the perfect thing, right? So he's his ego, and it's his empire. He's bringing safety and security to it. So do anything. He's just another person that's a stooge for the ego, like all the other ones in the galaxy. So
And then the way that battle develops has this terrible scene at the end when Anakin loses uh, and gets singed, burned up, from the volcanic magma or the lava actually.
well, he doesn't even lose. They fight to a stalemate, but he just can't accept that, and he's so full of himself, right? That Obi-Wan pulls up to the high ground. There's a stalemate. He goes, "Leave it alone." He even says, like, don't do it. High ground, you can't do it. And Anakin is like, well, I'm full of ego and I can do whatever. I'm the superhuman that's not actually a superhuman. And he tries to jump from below him over him and he gets his legs chopped off. But really it should have probably just been stalemate and just go their own way. And the fight was over. And he tried to extend it. And then yeah, he gets singed from the volcano, and he's kept alive by his hatred and the ego. And the emperor eventually gathers him up after fighting Yoda in the Senate chamber, which also is this beautiful visual image with those two battles kind of like superimposed on each other. It's just a great visually. Um, and then the transformation is complete, right? That's when he's finally put into the whole machine suit, where it's like basically he's almost entirely, almost all mechanical, like the Obi-Wan line that the Return of the Jedi. But he says, when Luke says, like, talks about if there's still some good in him, and he's just like, well, he's more machine than man. He's all twisted and evil, and you really get to like see that in that aspect. And obviously, that other movie came out before this one, so that's like an ode to that. I think it's intentional. Um, but yeah, that transformation into Lord Vader. It's the 97% ego, is the 3% essence left. There's nothing left, you know.
And you can see the 3% essence left when he gets singed by the lava, and
Mhm.
there's almost none of him left. It's a wonder that he survives at all.
Yeah.
He's gone. Everything is cooked. He has no legs. He has one hand. He's all burnt up like toast. And then he gets rescued, and now he's, yeah, 97% machine. And
Yeah.
there's this teeny little essence inside left, still fighting. But then as the story continues, you can see there's a teeny bit of good that's still hiding there.
Yeah, that's where it's at. Um, Actually, should we pause the episode for
I think that this would be a good place to
yeah, I agree.
wind up.
We could do the next three because there's three more movies to talk through.
Yes. So we will make this part one,
Yeah.
and there's a lot more to get through. So to summarize, we've looked at how the ego plays on our desires and tricks us to take wrong action. And that's the whole theme of the Star Wars analogies that we've been discussing today. So we'll say to everyone, remember to be the light, be the change you want to see.
Yep. And remember to vibrate at a higher frequency and maximize your Dharma for the collective. Love and light to everyone.
And we'll see you next time.